Hello, y'all. We welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Once again, with your hosts, myself, Bernhard and my wife, Laura Matsu. And the topic of this episode will be what facing evil can teach you. Now, this is a big one and very important this day and age because obviously many of us see the increase of evil in the world, and it can be very overwhelming. In fact, is very overwhelming for a lot of people, especially what we've gone through over the past 3 years or longer at this point. So we cannot ignore or avoid the darkness and evil in the world or even within our own lives anymore. We've also seen that a lot of people are quote unquote black-pilled in this day and age, right? Because of the nonstop psyops over the past 4 years and the mass trauma we've been through. You know, we're dealing with the global matrix trauma installment program, so to speak. And what is the essence of being black-pilled? Well, it basically means that people believe that evil will win. It's very negative, nihilistic, no hope, stuck in fear, even cynicism, and they can't even see the light at all. So everything becomes a psyop. There's traps everywhere, and have become very, very black-pilled in the true meaning of the word. In the sense, they're also taken over by Wetiko, which is a topic we'll be covering as well. So in the first hour, we'll dive deeper into the different types of evil, really defining evil from different traditions, different teachings, and what insights they have given us, be it the Luciferian, Ahrimanic evil, Steiner's work, Sri Aurobindo's work, and also from a psychological perspective, how narcissism feeds a specific type of evil, and also obviously why we need to face evil and how we can use evil as a teaching function. That's really the core aspect of this podcast. Now in the second hour then, which is only for members of veilofreality.com, my website, the membership, we go deeper into the Wetiko, the alien virus, occult hostile forces, the dark aspects of, or the dark forces that have overtaken humanity and work through humanity. How evil is also related to childhood trauma, and we look deeper into Jeffrey Wolfgreen's work of evolutionary astrology and the idea that evil is seen through the archetype of Lucifer and much, much more. And so before we start as well, I want to give another shout out to our 14-week group coaching program, which is starting soon, December 26th until April 3rd. And it is 14 weeks now. We've extended it to 2 weeks. That will be the 10th time we're doing this private group coaching program of psycho-spiritual work, really combining psychological work with in-depth spiritual inner work and combining the inner and outer work. And this program is definitely a deep dive where we also go into these topics we are covering here on our podcast in a much more depth with practical exercises and all kinds of tools you will need and use in this time of transition we're in right now. And you can learn more about it and apply at thattimeoftransition.com. I have to say the course this round is already at the recording of this podcast 75% full. It might be 80-90% full by the time of releasing this podcast. So if you want to join, go to thattimeoftransition.com, read about it, and apply. It's only limited to 35 people. Now, going back to this episode of what facing evil can teach you. So the important thing to reflect on in this podcast is also for your own inner work is to face how the potential of evil may play out within you. That's really the core aspect, because usually we only externalize evil. We see it out there, but big aspect of shadow work, Jungian, deeper inner shadow work, psychological work is also facing the potential for evil within us. This in itself can be or is a very humbling and confronting process. And you actually need to have the ego strength, like healthy ego strength, to do that. An individual with solid ego strength approaches challenges with a sense that he or she can overcome the problem, even grow as a result. So that's really what you need to understand in light of what's happening in the world. And it's also my motto, so to speak. All there is a lesson. Everything can be a teaching function. And from a deeper spiritual esoteric perspective, they also understood that these evil forces provide a deeper teaching function. That we all need to learn in order to graduate basically to the next level in our evolutionary journey. So if you can face the evil within you, then you can contribute to the healing of evil in this world, to transmute it, to bring in the light. That's really what it is. And the more you understand the evil within you, the more you can face it externally. Now, with that being said, let's dive into it and go into the different definitions or aspects of evil.
Okay, so we're going to start with Steiner's definition of evil. And he really talks about Ahriman and Lucifer, which are the fallen angels. So I'm just going to be honest. I'm not an anthroposophy scholar or expert in any way or form. I've studied it through my own psycho-spiritual studies. So I'm going to be reading actually a really great definition of it by Jeremy Smith, who's from the Anthropopper website. So you can Google him. And he says, Steiner does not make a straight distinction between good on one hand and evil on the other. Instead, he has two poles of evil, which he calls Lucifer and Ahriman. And Steiner saw Lucifer and Ahriman as not only forces or tendencies which affect humankind and draw us towards evil, but also as actual beings. So he's already getting into the occult aspect of it. And he says, unlike the Christ, these forces can take up their abode in our astral bodies, like similar to Wetiko, the seat of our desires and emotions, and thus exercise a strong influence on us from within. So there's spiritual forces that can basically take over us, is what he's trying to say. And he says Lucifer encourages the tendency in human beings towards expansiveness, inflation, egotism, sensuality, passion, and ungrounded spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Lucifer is the being who tells us that we are like the gods, knowing both good and evil, whereas Ahriman tells us that there is no God and that material reality is the only reality. So this is materialism. And materialism is like trust the science, the church of scientism, anything that you can't prove with scientific methods is not real, like the soul, spirit isn't real. This is the world we live in, actually. And then he goes on and he says, Ahriman represents tendencies towards contraction, reduction, splitting, materialism, over-intellectualization, lying, and the denial of spiritual realities. This leads to the idea that we are only physical beings. Both of these beings also play a helpful role and are in fact indispensable for human life. As the first awakens us to our freedom, Lucifer, while the second helps provides us the capacity for speech and thinking, Ahriman. These two forces work in harmony at the present time, even though they appeal to different instincts within us. And he says the way to deal with these two poles of evil is to seek the balance in the middle, which is represented by Christ, your heart, your soul, in other language. However, because Ahriman can only work through the seat of our desires, but Christ can only work through our I, the real I, our individuality, this means that the struggle is not an equal one. Our individuality has to so develop that it can, in time, learn to recognize and resist the many temptations offered by Lucifer and Ahriman. Christ provides the active plane of balance between the opposing forces of Lucifer coming from above and Ahriman coming from below. So Christ is like the unifying center of the heart, actually. And so Lucifer appeals above all to our pride and ambition, making us think that we have no limitations. Yet he is also the being who set us out on our evolutionary path to freedom. But Lucifer does not want us to be truly conscious, nor to acquire an egohood independent of himself. And he goes on to continue, in our present age, Ahriman is a greater threat to us than Lucifer. He is infinitely clever and is helping us to develop our technological civilization. He wishes us to advance at breakneck speed long before our individuality and moral nature are ready for such advances. He wishes to foreshorten our development so that we never reach our true goal, but only a false goal of enjoyment and endless material possessions.
So that's just sorry to interrupt, but that's basically transhumanism in a nutshell. Right
exactly.
there.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. And he says the scientist, the technologicist, and the inventor are Ahriman's natural prey, but all of us can fall victim to his temptations. Wherever there is egoism and love of power, entry is made easy for him. That's the key point. And it seems possible to me that we're living, he goes on to continue, we're living in the time of Ahriman's incarnation. Ahriman is a lord of death, and his will is to materialize human thinking into dead thinking to such an extent that the soul becomes fettered to the physical body and to an ever materialized earth, effectively cutting human beings off from their spiritual home as an Ahrimanic form of mortality. This is nothing than a spiritual death. And then he ends and he says something that we're going to talk about later as well, that the main things that we can do about this is work with prayer. And he says, prayer is the most important deterrent against the forces of evil in the world today. One person working with the light is able to offset 1,000 working against it. Each one of us is asked daily to send our light to the spiritual hierarchies. Due to the escalating attacks, the angelic world needs more of our light energy to help alleviate the mounting stress and to assist in the affairs of humankind. And then secondly, he says, we have to wake up to what's going on and we have to keep ourselves informed about the nature of evil.
Excellent. Thank you so much for summarizing. Very interesting. In a sense, it resembles these evil, occult, hostile forces, similar to integral yoga perspective or Wetiko. A lot of it, we go way deeper in the second hour, but that these evil forces like Ahriman, he writes, can work through the seed of desires, right? Or through our own mind. Basically, evil forces take a hold of something within ourselves. It's not really out there.
Yeah.
And it manifests through us. We have to really understand this from this bigger picture perspective, that this personality we tend to identify with, this ego, is an illusion in that sense, because we are transducers of higher forces, higher energies. And it's all about what we align ourselves with, like what he mentioned, even Christ or divine higher light beings or evil forces that can easily take a hold of us, usually through temptation and all kinds of desires. Even remember Sri Aurobindo talked, the big three temptations of humanity are money, sex, and power. And instead of rejecting these three forces, we need to save it or regain it from the hostile forces to bring it under the service of the divine.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that he notes here that essentially, the only place that cannot be touched by evil is our true essence, our divine nature, or the real I.
Yeah, so we're constantly struggling to these two poles. The Luciferian pole tends to pull humans towards egotism. We're like gods. Actually, you see this in a lot of New Age spirituality, where I'm a light worker from...
I'm a goddess.
They create these false spiritual images of themselves, And then the materialism is more I see in the consensus. We live in a culture philosophically of materialism. And I'm not just talking about thinking that the more objects you have, the happier. That's an aspect of it. But I'm talking about not acknowledging the existence of soul, essence, spirit, anything beyond the five senses. And this is the era that we're living. That's why the ultimate motto is trust the science, trust the experts,
That's interesting. I mean, in the sense, the New Age is Luciferian, or many of the pop spiritual stuff, the idea that I am already God, I can do whatever I want.
I can manifest anything.
I can manifest anything.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
Also the overestimation of the self. It's like a big ego trip.
Exactly. It's ungrounded spirituality. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so that's his definition, and just reflecting, again, always reflecting on yourself. How do these show up? It's very confronting to do it. I think about it a lot, actually, is I constantly see what's out in the world, and I'm like, okay, how is this affecting me? And it's really important to have that self-reflection, because it's really easy to go out there and be like, this is what's going on in the world. And that can be an important point for you to understand the nature of your own projections, but then take that projection that you have towards the outer world and look at how it plays out within you. Okay, so we're going to go into Scott Peck's definition of evil from People of the Lie. And this is a bit different. So we're going to just offer all these various different perspectives. And in my view, they all actually hold some truth in it. And so in People of the Lie, Scott Peck says that some people are very resistant to help, to change, to becoming better people, basically. And he describes these people as evil, and he says evil is a specific type of narcissism. And just for context, you have to read the book to understand the whole context. This doesn't mean every narcissistic tendency person, which we all have, is demonstrating this evil, but we all have the capacity for it, And he says, this is from Scott Peck, when I say that evil has to do with killing, I do not mean to restrict myself to corporeal murder. Evil is that which kills spirit. So that's the key thing. There are various essential attributes of life, particularly human life, such as sentience, mobility, awareness, growth, autonomy, and will. It is possible to kill or attempt to kill one of these attributes without actually destroying the body. Thus, we may, quote, break a horse or even a child without harming a hair on its head. And he says, Erich Fromm was acutely sensitive to this fact when he broadened the definition of necrophilia to include the desire of certain people to control others, to make them controllable, to foster their dependency, to discourage their capacity to think for themselves, to diminish their unpredictability and originality, and to keep them in line. And he distinguishes this necrophilic person from the biophilic person, one who appreciates and fosters a variety of life forms and the uniqueness of the individual. He demonstrated a necrophilic character type whose aim is to avoid the inconvenience of life by transforming others into obedient automatons, robbing them of their humanity. Evil, then, for the moment, is the force residing inside or outside of human beings that seeks to kill life or liveliness. And goodness is its opposite. Goodness is that which promotes life and liveliness. So I know that can be a little bit hard to understand, so I'll just give a direct example. And I read the whole book, so I understand what he's saying. He uses an example of parents who basically, didn't support their son's childhood dreams in a sense, or like kind of just put him down, So if you have a child and, say the child is really into playing soccer, but you don't want the child to be a soccer player. You think that people who are athletes are dumb and, there's better, more refined things to do. So you force that child instead to play piano. In that moment, when you force the child to act against its own individuality and fit into the mold, you're killing the life spirit of that child, actually. You're not murdering it entirely, but you're robbing them of their spirit. Instead of allowing them to follow their passions to learn soccer, you're forcing them into do this. So that's what he uses as an example of evil. It's a very specific type of narcissism, which doesn't actually appreciate the individual and wants to turn it into, it wants to make them controllable, basically. And it kills life in them. So we're doing this all the time. I think we're all guilty of this, like in moments when someone shares their like hopes and dreams with us, and then our own jealousy and envy comes up, and then we just want to put them down because we aren't living up to our own dreams. This happens all the time.
Well, that evil also obviously happens in public school, right? Just forming kids into a certain idea of how they can contribute to society, but not helping them to become free thinking, creative individuals.
Yeah, the whole systems, exactly. For sure. Yeah. And I think we do it all the time, is like we have to really try and look at people and seek out that seed of goodness, as hard as it is. And actually the best way to do that is to know the goodness in your own heart and soul first. And then it becomes much easier to identify it in other people.
Yeah. So before we go deeper into more definitions, understandings from different traditions and teachings, I really want to point out, because we see a lot of people are definitely, like I mentioned in the introduction, very overwhelmed with what's going on in the world. There's a lot of evil, a lot of it is coming to the surface. It's undeniable anymore, right? And many people deal with it in different ways, different coping mechanisms, disassociations, even denial and all of that, which we can talk about later as well. But I see mostly people trying to eradicate evil, trying to get rid of evil, right? Externally by let's arrest or punish the bad guys and all of that. But essentially, that's actually a trap in itself if you don't understand the evolution of consciousness and the role of evil, so to speak, as part of the lesson process, as part of this dark age we're in right now, the Kali Yuga, as disturbing as it is. But what we have done, we have basically also created a quote-unquote false duality. You see it even in the very dogmatic Christian religion of as Christ, and then this Satan is this other independent personality almost, right? And it becomes very, how can I say, materialistic based. It's personified, almost projecting human qualities into God, into Christ, or even Satan, without really understanding the more nuance and complexity, right?
We're going to talk, by the way, when we go into Carolyn Miss's thoughts about evil, she actually talks about dogmatic religion and how that contributes to it. And
that dogmatic religion itself is actually part of evil.
Yes.
When you talk about that, with the self-righteousness and all of that. But what I want to tie that into is because we also talk a lot about this in our courses. It comes up, Embodied Soul Awakening, the problem of evil. Sri Aurobindo talked about this in his work of Integral Yoga. And I want to share an excellent quote from his book, The Life Divine. the chapter on the origin and remedy of falsehood, error, wrong, and evil. And he really beautifully describes how the relation of truth to falsehood, of good to evil, is not a mutual dependence. It means it's not a duality as what we usually think of a duality, like male and female, left and right, and all of that. So that's very important to understand. And let me just read it from him, and then we can comment on it. Okay, so here he writes, "It is sometimes reasoned that as truth and good have their absolutes, so falsehood and evil must also have their absolutes. Or, if it is not so, then both must belong to the relativity only. Knowledge and ignorance, truth and falsehood, good and evil, exist only in relation to each other, and beyond the dualities here, they have no existence. But this is not the fundamental truth of the relation of these opposites. For, in the first place, falsehood and evil are, unlike truth and God, very clearly results of the ignorance, and cannot exist where there is no ignorance. They cannot have any self-existence in the divine being. They cannot be native elements to the supreme nature. If then the limited knowledge, which is the nature of ignorance, renounces its limitations, if ignorance disappears into knowledge, evil and falsehood can no longer endure. For both are fruits of unconsciousness and wrong consciousness, and if true or whole consciousness is there replacing ignorance, they have no longer any basis for their existence." So what it comes down to, basically what he writes going further, is that there cannot be any absolute of falsehood. There's no absolute evil, no absolute of evil. These things are a byproduct of the world movement. The somber flowers of falsehood and suffering and evil have their root in the black soul of the inconscient, the collective unconscious. Again, of good and evil, it can be said that one exists by true consciousness, the other survives only by wrong consciousness. If there is an unmixed true consciousness, good alone can exist. It is no longer mixed with evil or formed in its presence. Human values of good and evil, as of truth and error, are indeed uncertain and relative. What is held as truth in one place or time is held in another place or time to be error. What is regarded as good is elsewhere or another time regarded as evil. We find too that what we call evil results in good, what we call good results in evil. This relativity, this mixture of circumstance of human mentality and the workings of the cosmic force in human life, it is not the fundamental truth of good and evil. So that's also very important to understand what we see as good or bad, good or evil. All of it is come through on a subjective perception that can change over time because we don't have the absolute vision of God and the divine.
Yeah.
Right? That ties into also projections of what we think is good or evil.
Yeah. Like the worst things that happen to you often end up being the best things that happen to you.
Exactly. Because we don't see. And then he finishes up, "Therefore, the relation of truth to falsehood, of good to evil, is not a mutual dependence, but is the nature of a contradiction as of light and shadow. A shadow depends on the light for its existence, but light does not depend for its existence on the shadow. The relation between the absolute and these contraries of some of its fundamental aspects is not that they are opposite fundamental aspects of the absolute. No. Falsehood and evil have no fundamentality, no power of infinity or eternal being, no self-existence even by latency in the self-existent, no authenticity of an original inherence." So that's a key point, but that's what black-pilled people fall into. They think that evil is going to win and overtake the world and kill God and everything and will be in an absolute evil existence. But that goes against the truth because evil cannot exist by itself. And hence we also understand, and it's very important, hard to understand for the egoic mind, linear mindset, separative ego consciousness to understand that all is one, right? And there's always a seed of God even in any evil we see. And nothing is completely evil. It cannot exist as an absolute.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to actually go through the deep psychological work to face what is happening in reality and the evil that you see directly without jumping to like, oh, but all is one, like even though my dad abused me, all is one. Like I get that there's a larger spiritual lesson in these difficult experiences, but you have to go through the journey to realize that on a soul level. you can't just intellectualize it.
Yeah, that's
it's ironic, actually, because intellectualizing is another aspect of Steiner's model of evil.
That's the Luciferian is basically spiritual bypass.
Yeah.
And you can hold like this higher truth that all is one, there's only God, there's only love.
Yeah.
No, but that's where the paradox happens. And we still need to fight these forces of evil, the unconscious, the ignorance, as it calls it, the ignorance within ourselves.
Yeah, which is interesting. So like, because I hear this a lot from people, that people can get very triggered when you talk about evil, because it is a terrifying thought that there is real darkness which is to harm other people. But when you listen to these quotes that I just read, even the Scott Peck one, you see the subtlety behind it. Actually, it's not like just these evil, harsh murderers like going and like setting fires and like dramatic, satanic rituals and stuff. This is everyday life. This is like happening with your partner, with your family, at the grocery store, on social media. It's pretty exaggerated, So, and then, so just to finish that off, I see that the denial of evil actually is both Luciferianism and Ahrimanic, because it's grounded in intellectualizing the process and it's ungrounded spirituality. It's both of them.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a trap within. One trap is trying to, get all negative, freak out, paranoid about evil in the world and trying to control the world and trying to eradicate evil externally by arresting what we think the bad guys, kill them all, the psychopaths, until there's no evil. Like, that's just, kind of ejected from reality, right? Yeah. So that's one extreme response, which is also based on illusion. And the other extreme is the spiritual bypass. Oh, all is one. Everything is just going as supposed. So we don't need to do anything. Just let it be.
Yeah. And I have to say, as someone, I have quite a bit of Scorpio placements. I have some pretty dark experiences in my life. If you've listened to this podcast, South Node in Scorpio, Pluto in Scorpio. I mean, if you have strong Pluto 8th house signatures, which we'll talk about in the second hour, Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about that as being correlated astrologically with confrontations with evil, basically. Mm-hmm. But, and I've actually tried to spiritual bypass some of the darker things that I've experienced, meaning deny, actually, being like, oh, it's all light, only seeing the good side of experiences. But actually, I found that, through my own inner work, through my own shadow work, through my own trauma and early childhood work, I've realized actually through facing the evil and seeing it for what it is directly, I've developed this very holistic perspective on the dark and the light, where I'm not afraid of either, actually. And actually, the teaching function of evil for me was it did lead me to sincerely turn to God. And it led me beyond the Ahrimanic materialism of the world. And I turned to the divine. So like, this is the paradox, is like, if I were not, I know in my own life, if I were not confronted with such intensity of darkness, I may have never gotten there. So, there is this kind of hero's journey with the confrontation with evil that I think many of us are being called to take now, or maybe you didn't before.
And we still, I see it in myself too, because in the past I've definitely had more very externalized black and white view of evil and good. Mm-hmm. Projecting it onto the world. Yeah. And very, so obviously, I still, I think the deeper you go into inner work, especially apply shadow work, trauma work, go into the spiritual domain and really do the work sincerely. First of all, you don't see just evil. You see the work needs to be done within, because as within, so without. We see the evil manifesting in the world because of our own ignorance, of our own unconsciousness suppression. And we project it externally or it manifests unconsciously. We live in this illusion of separation. So I realized also then early on, okay, I need to face the darkness within myself. And darkness doesn't necessarily mean evil or bad. Whatever is unconscious is dark,
Well, it can be the way that you, through your own unhealed trauma, can steal life from people, like Scott Peck said.
Exactly. So I realized too, then I can see this nowadays, if all this quote unquote truther community and red pill people who just woke up and speak out, and it's great, but I can see how their own trauma, their own shadow, they're projecting it onto the world, onto these evil people with their own hate and anger. Yes. Right? And you need to be able to point out what's going on in the world without projecting onto it, but owning it within yourself, so to speak. So you don't become, again, Nietzsche's quote,
gaze into the abyss.
And the abyss stares back to you, that you become that what you fight against. Yeah, because that's how Wetiko works.
And I forget who said it, but I like the 80-20 rule. Like, be 80% focused on how evil manifests within you. And that's a big project, by the way. That takes self-observation, self-awareness. It takes the growing of conscience, which starts in your heart and soul, to recognize when it happens and also to be loving and forgiving when it does and to make amends. That's the whole point, is to allow yourself through your unconsciousness, through the collective unconsciousness of the world, to know that you may act this out sometimes through your own unconsciousness, and to recognize it through conscience, forgive yourself and make amends. And through that, you'll realize, wow, we are our best teachers in that sense. No one is going to catch you like your own self-awareness. So I think I'm going to go on the Carolyn Miss quote now. Is that okay?
Yeah, I want to add one more thing.
Yep.
Real quick about this nuanced view, because I want to give a real life example, for example, of Elon Musk. What's happening now on Twitter. He's freed free speech, right? But everybody's still suspicious. People still see him, wolf in sheep clothing. He's a transhumanist, atheist still. He's also just announced advancement is Neuralink, putting chips into human brains and all of that. And I used to have a very this view of Elon Musk as well, and others okay, he's just the Trojan horse, is a wolf in sheep clothing, you know what I mean? It's distracting. But it has shifted. It has become more nuanced, right? It's not this black and white anymore. Because I realize also my own subjective blind spots that I cannot see. I don't see with the eyes of the divine. I have to have the humility to see that, there's something bigger happening which needs to play itself out. And these judgments we have can easily come, I can say, from my own self, from my own trauma, from my own shadow projections, and not really be truly objective, right?
Yeah.
So I want to just share this one little quote by Sapram before we go into Carolyn Miss. Is that okay? Because it's a short one. He really summarizes it well as well. And he writes, the quote can be, again, challenging for the mind, so to speak, getting lost in paradoxes. But he writes, truth has nothing to do with thought or good deeds, though these may be steps on the way. It has to do with the vastness of being, and the growth process is slow and difficult. But the mind, which only sees the present surface of things, seeks to trim off all the rough edges, purify by exclusion, and reduce its world to a uniform, righteous, and equitable truth. It decrees, this is good, this is bad, this is friendly, this is hostile. It might want to eliminate all the Nazis from the world, or all the Chinese, for instance, thinking they are quite unnecessary calamities. And the mind is right by definition, since it is designed to be reasonable, and since it too expresses a mental or moral absolute that has its place and purpose. But it is not the whole truth. It is only a point of view. Some will say that our partiality, our mind, our morals are necessary instruments for living in the world as it is now. And this is true. We do need to be partial, but it is also why the world is not whole. Finally, this is why we lack power. Because if we possessed power, we would, with the best of intentions, precipitate a catastrophe through our ignorance and short-sightedness. But our shortcomings are necessary shortcomings. Not only does this divine consciousness capture all the points of view, but also the deeper forces at work behind each thing, as well as the truth within each thing. It is a truth consciousness, and because it sees all, it automatically possesses power. But we are powerless because we do not see with this divine vision. To see and to see totally necessarily means to have power, but the supramental divine power does not obey our logic or morality. It sees far into space and time, and it does not do away with evil in order to save the good. Nor does it work through miracles. It frees the good that is within the evil, applying its force and light on the dark half so it consents to its luminous counterpart. Whenever it is applied, the immediate effect is to touch off a crisis, that is, to place the shadow in front of its own light. It's a stupendous evolutionary ferment. And that's really what it is, an evolutionary ferment, that friction of dark versus light, of evil versus good, and really spiritualizing not only ourselves, but all of humanity in the world. And that is the whole process. In that sense, evil has its purpose because it provides the necessary friction for evolution.
Okay, so we're going to move in lastly to a quote by Carolyn Miss about evil from her audiobook about evil. And, we're referencing several teachers because we really want you, if you're curious about this topic, check out these people's work, Like the other day I had to look up the definition of gatekeeping actually, because I didn't know what it meant. And gatekeeping is actually preventing people from finding the original source of what you're talking about. And that's not what we want to do on the podcast, actually. We want to be like, hey, check out this book, check out this book. Like, you know, like even Bernhard's articles, he freely sources everything, because this is like, we're opening all these threads. And if you find something interesting, like go off on your own journey and contemplate and read and reflect. So Carolyn Miss has this really great audiobook about evil. You can download it yourself. And she talks about how it works through spirituality. And then she talks about differentiating between what is evil and what is bad, and then the teaching function. So I'm going to go into those concepts. And she begins by saying, this is this moment in time where our collective darkness and darkness as a force has reached the alarm stage. And our capacity to generate light, to utilize our light, to rely on the light, to reach for the light is at its weakest. And she says that one of the ways that evil engages in us is to make you cling to something that Buddha would say is an illusion. And you would die for that illusion, no matter any amount of proof that is put in front of you. Because that illusion gives you access to what is spiritually known as the 7 deadly sins: pride, perhaps your anger, or it allows you to maintain a position that you know is not the truth, but it gives you power over human beings in some way. One of the creeds of these religions is separatism. You must be part of us because our God is better than your God, and we have the only God. Now, a realization I came to through my work as a medical intuitive, and this is what brought me into the deep love of mysticism, which I believe is about organic spirituality, organic divinity, the biospiritual environment that's in our body, runs on the laws of the universe, what is one in the whole, basically like a holistic mindset is what she's talking about. And she says, now put that next to a religious teaching that says you have to be better than other people. The fundamental teachings of these religions are in collision with what your soul knows to be the truth of what your soul on how to maintain psychic, emotional well-being. The belief that you have to be better than someone, that you are better than someone, that you are superior is actually so toxic that it begins to disintegrate your immune system, and is also toxic to belong to a religion that says that's what God wants you to do, like be better than other people. So the time has come as we become a global community that these teachings have to dissolve, and the mystical jewels of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Sufi traditions, these are what we will take with us. So she's talking about the esoteric meanings of these religions need to be taken with us, but we have to let the political packaging of these teachings burn as it should. And she says all these teachings point to the same mystical truth, that we're one, we're governed by the same one. What we do to one, we do to everything. And I owe it to you to face my darkness now more than ever, because one of the truths is getting revealed to us is that we are all one. And the power of darkness is not offset by bombs, bullets, but by the power of light within us. And in order to do that, and of this I'm convinced, we really have to understand the nature of evil. We have to understand its insidious ways. We have to recognize the whole meaning of lead us into temptation means. Doesn't mean you're being tempted with sexuality down an alleyway. What it really means in the subtle world of our inner psyche is the way we talk to ourselves, the way we encourage self-pity in ourselves instead of discourage it, the way we play into our wounds instead of our strengths. So she's defining this as evil. These are the choices we make. And we could easily play into our strengths. That's why we pray, God, give me the grace to do this. Give me a little backbone here. One good prayer can push you over. But in order to really know your light, you have to recognize this darkness. And she really says it. This is released also right before the pandemic, by the way. Now more than ever, it is not enough to think that things are going to go away and take care of themselves. They're not. And if you're alive now, you're journeying through this incredible, pivotal transformation. This era is unlike anything before. You're here because you have a purpose to be here, and you're part of this, and you're needed. Your soul is needed, which means your choices matter. And part of that choice is I've got to become conscious of what my dark side does as well as my light. And very few people, in fact, I can't think of one in my whole career as a teacher. No one has ever come to me and said, I'm in your workshop so I can understand my darkness and the power of that, the power of my dark choices. They'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in therapy to understand how other people's dark choices have gutted them, but not their own. And you know what? That's part of how darkness works. By telling you it's never your fault. Nothing's ever your fault. we're always off the hook, because nothing would serve darkness more than to keep everybody in that child state of mind.
Can I just comment on some of the things
Yes.
you mentioned before you go on?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it's very good. So interesting. Also, like our definition of temptation, the way I understand it, temptation, we always think like of the obvious ones, 7 deadly sins or greed, sex, power, and all of that, right?
Yeah.
The temptation of the Christ, you know, and,
Yeah.
and the sins, and how it has been completely, distorted, especially in dogmatic Christian religions and all of that. But temptation, in the way she described, is being tempted almost by your false self, by your wounds, by keeping telling the lies you tell yourself,
Exactly.
by externalizing, by blaming others, by not taking self-responsibility, right?
Exactly.
We see that. I see many people, like over the years I've worked with as well, but a lot of people sometimes, exactly what she says, they want the way they try to heal is by finding a story that explains why they've suffered, so they can justify it or blame somebody else.
They can blame someone, yeah.
Exactly.
And this
be
is
it the system or
the parents,
the poverty, scarcity consciousness, and this and that, or their parents, or their ex is a narcissist, psychopath, or even like the fringe occult knowledge I get into, it's a love bite, it's an entity, something needs to be blamed externally.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing, that I think if you've experienced childhood trauma and difficult childhood experiences, number one, it's very psychologically confronting to first recognize the harm that was done to you, to recognize that your parents were not the perfect gods that you thought they were, and then to really emotionally process the grief around that experience. But the last part, actually, and the closing part, is to recognize how those patterns continue on within you in some way. And it doesn't mean it's black and white, like my mom was like this, which means I'm like this. Like your mom could have actually put you down to the point where you don't recognize your light anymore. And that's a continuation of her evil.
Yeah.
So you want to constantly look at like how it can kind of pervert and distort itself in all sorts of ways, like she said. Okay, so I'm going to go on and talk, because she has also a really good paragraph about the difference between evil and what is bad, actually.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So, and I found this very interesting. And she says, there is a difference between what is evil and what is bad. And it's in the consciousness, in the intent. What is the journey of consciousness all about but to become aware? Evil is about what you knew, but you did otherwise. That actually also collaborates with what Scott Peck says in People of the Lie, by the way, is that people know what the right thing to do is, and then they don't do it.
That's a great definition of evil, right?
Yes,
there.
exactly. Yeah. And then she says, this is not okay, but my own will, I am choosing to do it anyway. Now we are getting into evil. There's bad, there's stupid, there's you gotta be kidding me. But then there's the engagement of choice and consciousness. And there's a reason why we have the word sin. But one of the reasons I feel that I think that evil has been unleashed, and one of the ways that evil is off the leash, is because the ways we've been traditionally been taught to be aware of evil, so to protect ourselves, speak of it, respect it, all of those are gone. So all of the safeguards around evil are gone. And in these last 50 years, we've decided we don't need the protection of praying anymore. We don't need the protection of grace. We don't need the protection of inner work at the depth that really protects a person from awareness of their own actions and awareness of that I'm in the presence of evil or I'm tampering the dark, which that's what awareness brings. To recognize what I am doing with these people, I'm leading myself into temptation. This kind of astute awareness comes with self-reflection and contemplation, where you say to yourself, why do I want to be with that person? What made me compromise my integrity today? Why did you say yes when you meant no? And then you slowly realize that when you compromise yourself, that's how evil gets in. Mm-hmm. But we don't have these practices. We changed our language. We don't even say the word conscience anymore. Mm-hmm. We use the word consciousness. It means nothing. There's no connection to the sacred. When we say conscience, we never say conscious. We never conscience. We never use these words. Kids are not taught these words. They are not taught how to recognize a moral or ethical crisis. They're not taught to speak from this place. And they're not given words like sin to recognize what sin is. And she says, what is a sin? A sin is when you knowingly make a choice that you know the outcome is going to hurt someone or they're going to pay for something you did, and you know that and it doesn't stop you. It's totally okay with you. That act of consciousness that it is okay for you to make a choice that will in some way harm the life of another person and doesn't stop you makes that a sin. Because we no longer have these words is that we think we're too intelligent. We don't need it. We think we've evolved past this archaic, dusty language. But we have to dismantle the word conscience so we can understand the crimes that we're doing, basically. So she brings it down. It's conscience. It's like, and if you don't have a connection to conscience, listen to the healthy shame episode because we really go into that.
You have to have a connection. In order to have a connection to conscience, you have to have a connection to healthy shame and healthy guilt. That's kind of your compass.
Yeah, because because the shame either creates a Luciferianism, egotism, where like I'm the best, nothing can ever touch me, or it can create the materialistic, the other side of the equation. You know,
keep in mind, full-blown psychopaths have no shame, no guilt, and no conscience.
Yes,
exactly.
But I would have to say, you know, that's still a small percentage of the population, and because we live in this almost like psychopathic reality at times, you know, if just go on social media, see how nasty people are to each other, you know?
That reminds me of the book, I forgot the title, Lobachevsky, about political ponerology. Ponerology is Latin, it means the science, the study of evil, the science of evil. And this whole book is about psychopathy. And he said, we live in a world where our culture, society has become ponerized, similar to what Krishnamurti said. We live in a world where pathologies have become normalized. Why? Because the world is quote unquote ruled by the top 4 or 5% who are full-blown genetic psychopaths, and they have installed psychopathic values into the world through culture, through entertainment, through education, actually. And materialism in itself, and atheism and all of that.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to comment on is something you read. Can you remind me? She said something, evil comes in where we compromise ourselves, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, she basically talks about how we removed these safeguards of evil. And one of the ways that shows up is like, you know, we need to have that awareness with self-reflection and contemplation so we can say to ourselves, where did I compromise my integrity today? When did you say yes? When did you say yes when you meant no? And then you realize when you slowly compromise yourself, that's how evil gets in.
Yeah, and that's the best example. What happened over the past 3 years, people have compromised their integrity. They said yes to something that needs to be a strong boundary, be it with the medical treatment, be it with all the lies we've been told over the past 3 years, the lockdowns and all of that's been happening. That's how evil took over, by the consent. They have to understand, as a universal law, by people consenting to it, and then it just takes them over more and more, and then they start even to police each other and all of that, but people have compromised their integrity.
Yeah,
also via manipulation, via conditioning, brainwashing, fear, propaganda, and all of that, but still, that's where the entry point was.
And I think one way I saw it show up is that I knew people who worked in the field that I worked in, who knew that was going on, who knew that the vaccine was unsafe and didn't say anything. And that was like, according to these definitions, it was an aspect of evil, you know, because like, how could you not if you know what could potentially happen? So I'm just going to close off because she has a really good way of reflecting on how evil shows up in our lives. And she says that one of the laws of the universe is that darkness is attracted to light and light is attracted to darkness. They need each other. They feed off each other, which is why all the great teachers have said, as you develop your light, you must pray because you will be tested and tempted. This is not a myth. This is a truth. The stronger you make your inner life, nothing becomes easier, but it becomes more majestic. It should fill you with awe as you see playing out before you everything the great teachers told you would happen. And if the darkness comes, you can say, I was expecting you, but I'm prepared to know exactly how this is going to work. And evil evaporates when you do not negotiate your soul. That's the key thing is like, we say it in our course, embodied soul awakening is we're just trying to bring people's hearts and souls back online because that's the ultimate inner compass. And then she says some questions to reflect on for yourself. At the end of the day, is Earth better or do people have to clean up after you? Darkness wants you to become unconscious. So you need to make the decision, decide the worse it gets, the more conscious I'm going to get. The more difficult, the more clear, because evil wants us to be ill, to be the weakest versions of ourselves. Darkness leads to self-loathing of knowing I've just lied to myself. Eventually, you need to keep silencing that voice, and that's where addiction comes in. Darkness makes you think that everybody else is at fault but you. If everybody else is at fault, then you can feel sorry for yourself and sabotage your life. And then she says, to close it off, darkness ties in what you said earlier too. Darkness' favorite word is blame and deserve. Pay attention to when you say you blame or you say I deserve, because that's the favorite vocabulary of your dark side.
Yeah, that's entitlement as well, right?
Yeah.
The narcissism is a form of evil, and you see it like that. Well, that's a very great quote. I mean, again, we're at the end of the first hour. Really what I want to bring down, the reason why we also shared so many different quotes or perspectives from different teachings and teachers and traditions, is really to understand that, you know, we have still this, what I call this kind of childish idea of evil. I've written about this before. We're like little kids playing in the sandbox or sandcastles. I want to just, trying to get rid of evil and all of that externally. But we need to understand the evolutionary function of evil and how evil operates, not just out there, but how easily and subtly in our own lives. And then it takes, literally, it's kind of like the butterfly effect, or it kind of becomes, it gets worse over time, so to speak, because one little lie becomes a big lie. And once we betray ourselves or out of integrity, then we keep doing it, or we compare ourselves to others. We do it because other people are doing it. You know, the group consciousness, the hive mind, is actually an aspect of evil in the sense, or can overtake a whole group. Which
there's definitely collective evil for sure.
Exactly,
yeah.
Which Paul Levy talks about in Vatica and all that. So the key work is really going back to the inner work, right? That's why it is so important, and all the traditions, teachings talk about it. This, especially nowadays, the psychological and spiritual work going together, so you don't fall into the Luciferian trap of spiritual bypassing and abusing spiritual truths and all of that. And especially nowadays, understanding the trauma work, the shadow work, because through these entry points, that is where evil enters, right? And when I say not staying in victim blame consciousness, yeah, a lot of horrible things have happened to people, even to you, and it needs to be acknowledged, but it's important not to get stuck in there, right? But to heal it, but to transmute it, so we become not that, what we fight against, and also cut ancestral trauma or family trauma, so we get out of this loop of hurt people, because wounded people who have been hurt and haven't healed themselves hurt other people.
And the key thing to that, when you say transmute, you have to grieve the losses of that inner child, because the grief turns to depression, which turns to anger, which turns to evil, actually. So there's like this kind of succession of how, which we're going to get in the second hour, how childhood trauma can turn to evil. I mean, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. We're also going to talk about the occult perspective, Wetiko and evil, very popular topic. Jeffrey Wolf Green has a very interesting topic about Lucifer and the way that evil plays out in that. So we're going to go much deeper into the second hour. So if you want to join us, you're going to go to veilofreality.com, and there's a link to click on the membership. And then you have access to, I think it's definitely nearing 100 hours of second hour content for every podcast. And we often talk about topics which we have to be careful talking about on the first hour and the second hour. So if you want to join us, go to veilofreality.com, click on membership, and you can become a member.
With that being said, see you all in the second hour. Thanks for listening.